Okay, an empirical study on difference between residents' income, social mobility, and higher education equity in Eastern, Central, and Western China from 2001 to 2021. And I'm from Northeastern University, majoring in English, and this fall I will go to the University of Hong Kong to learn for the comparative and global studies in education and development for the Master of Education. And now I'm a research assistant at the UNESCO International Center for Higher Education Innovation at the International Institute of Online Education for African and Asian University Professors Empowerment. So for this study, first I would like to give a brief introduction about the background and literature review. So for the differences of the development and the educational stratification between different regions in China, we should mention the social stratification theory, and especially we should pay attention to the Karl Marx's class theory, which emphasizes the modernization and industrialization will increase in the gap between the rich and the poor, rather than all the people equally enjoy the benefits of growth, which is quite similar to the current content of Chinese development. And in China, with the modern technology development, the economic growth didn't instantly bring about the upward social mobility, and the social stratification caused by the marketization also leads to the education stratification in different regions in the central, western, and eastern China. And another theory is about Weber's stratification theory. We can see the three dimensions on the society, including wealth, reputation, and power. And the wealth plays an important role in the regional differences in China for the economic and educational stratification. And then I would like to mention the class structure in the Western societies between the differences among the China's current social stratum structure. The ideal social structure is with the hugest, the largest component of the middle class, as for its politically moderate economic consumption capacity and abiding law behavior in social performance. But while in China, at this stage, the social stratum structure is not reasonable, which is still changing, and especially in the eastern of China, the upper class compose the higher level and larger component than the most middle class and lower class in the central and the western China. So here are some reasons for differentiation and reorganization of social stratification in Chinese society, including China's basic economic system has changed from the single public ownership economy in the past to the public ownership as the main body and multiple ownership for common development. Especially for the eastern part of China, the multiple ownership for common development has gained a great achievement in the recent years. And the second component is the Industrial Revolution, serves as the driving force of social stratum differentiation. In the eastern coastal cities in China, the Industrial Revolution, especially in the artificial intelligence, the modern medical care and technologies, and also the Internet of Things or the big data, cloud computing, this kind of cutting-edge technology has transformed the industrial structure and the labor markets structure in the eastern coastal part. And the third is the marketization act as a pulling force of social stratum differentiation. The marketization development stages is quite prominent in eastern part of China rather than the limited advancement in the central and western part. And the third part is about data analysis and findings. This study is based on the intensive secondary data analysis and field work observations in Chinese context. The first problem among the differences in the three regions is the educational stratification in rural and urban areas. Firstly, we should pay attention to the urbanization to the urbanization gap between the eastern, central, and western China. First, some data we can say that the urbanization rate of permanent residents in the eastern region is close to 60%, while that in the central and the western regions is only about 50%, which means this gap will cost about 15 to 20 years for the construction for improvement. And among the current 15 national central cities, 10 are located in east, 2 in the middle, and 3 in the western China. And for the poor counties in the county and countryside level, there are 448 poor counties in the central and western regions, accounting for 67.4%. And there are only 66 poor counties in the eastern part of China. And when it comes to the ranking list of China's top 100 cities, 61 are located in the eastern part, and the 23 in the middle, and only 16 in the western part. So when it comes to the differences among the urban and the rural residents in the eastern and western part, we can find that in the western part of China and the central part of China, the rural residents compose for a large percentage, while the urban residents mostly living in the eastern coastal cities in China. And in China, there are different policy and welfare among the rural and urban residents, especially in housing, education, and medical care treatment expenditure. So this dual social structure leads to the dual economic structure and finally caused the dual educational stratification in the 3 regions in parts of China. And for the registered resident stratification, we should base to the policy changing process. And the latest one is in the 1960s. China experienced economic difficulties and shortages in supply of food and daily necessities at that time. So from that time on, China began to implement the policy of completely banning farmers from the mobility and migrant from the rural countryside to urban cities. So they are banning from living in cities for a long time. And marketization of and decentralization of education also leads to some disadvantages, such as reduced the state's role in providing and financing social services, especially for the rural areas in the western and central cities. So the students from the western and the central China are get less welfare because of the marketization, decentralization of education policy, which enlarged the educational gap between the different regions in China. And also the farmers are the main components of Chinese society. We can, from this graph, we can see that the from before the 2010, the urban population is less than the rural population, which is blue. The blue ones are the rural, and the orange ones are the urban population. But in the every year, the proportion of urban population is increasing in a stable rate. So the farmers, when the farmers are the main components of Chinese society for a long time, we can find that even though the problem of food and clothing has been basically solved for the income among farmers, the dilemma of uneven development, especially among different regions in central, western, and eastern part of countryside, are still exist. So for the rural-urban educational stratification, we can find that especially for the world-class universities like Peking University, the students from countryside fell from 30% to 10%. And for the Tsinghua University, which is the top 2 university in China, the 2020 rural students accounted only for 17%. For the massification of higher education in China, we can find that even though the total admission of the college, secondary vocational high school, and the universities are increasing from 2016 to 2020. But we should notice that the major component for the increased enrollment amount is concentrated on the secondary vocational education and the vocational high school. And the main parts, the main components of the student resource in the vocational high school and the vocational universities are the students from the rural areas in the Western and the Central China, in the second tier cities in China. So there is a great gap in the educational outcome because of the regional differences of development levels. And then I'd like to talk about the problem of the social economic status of household in different regions of China. The result is Eastern is performed well than the Middle and Western China. The one important fact is the inequality in higher education in resources, for the education resources. The Eastern economically developed provinces have more educational resources and a high enrollment rate. And this is a distribution of the most prominent university in China. This project is the first tier project with 39 universities, and there are 26 top universities are concentrated in Eastern, and especially in the Eastern coastal area. And for the first tier, another group of universities consists of 112 universities. There are 71 of them are concentrated in the Eastern China. But for the Central and Western China, this kind of top tier university and most prominent university are very limited compared to the Eastern part. And another problem is a huge gap in the college entrance examination performance. From this table, we can notice that the admission rate has increased year by year, but there are still some differences in the admission rate of colleges and in the Eastern, Central, and Western regions. The admission rate in the Eastern and Central regions is significantly higher than that in the West. So for another problem is the huge gap in the quality high school resources, which is linked to the students' performance of the college entrance examination in China. The number of top 100 middle schools in China, in the Eastern part, it's have got the 50%, and the Western part have got the least component with only 18 top 100 middle schools in China. The most fundamental reason for the regional stratification is the unbalanced economic development. We can find from this table that the GDP of the Eastern region accounts for more than 50% of the national GDP. But the population is only nearly 40% of the national population in Eastern area. And then another problem is inequality in household income among Eastern, Western, and Central cities in China. The top three cities with the most income, with about 6 million per year household, are the Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong. While the Central and Western part cities are with the limited family income. Also, the tuition fee pays a heavy pressure for the ordinary farmer in China's interior cities in the central part of China. They should almost spend 3.5 years to earn the tuition fees for increasing tuition fee for supporting a bachelor student for 4-year university expenditure. And in China, the several measures have been taken place for alleviating this regional stratification in education. So one policy is double reduction policy, which is the latest one in China, which is the burden of excessive homework and especially the off-campus tutoring, which can also called the shadow education as private tutoring schooling after the school, and which is quite popular in the eastern part of China in some developed cities. So for the shadow education in the rural and in the western and central cities are very limited, and this policy of reducing the off-campus tutoring can bridge the educational stratification and the gap among the different regions in China. And finally is the educational stratification in competitive labor market. The mass higher education policy in China didn't brought the positive employment because there are some phenomena of the graduates, the talents, their competence cannot match the some cutting edge technology companies in the advanced cities in eastern part of China, and the most central and western part of China, the universities' talents, their cultivation curriculum can't match well for the labor markets in the developed cities in China. So that caused the returns of education have flattened out and the social mobility has slowed down. And also, this phenomenon needs to examine the effects of changing labor markets on the students' life chances, social mobility, and social equality, and to get the broader discussion on the social justice of the massification of higher education, which how to better match the requirement in different regions in China for the future development.
Excuse me, you have 3 minutes left.
Oh, okay, thank you so much. So there's some so that's based on these circumstances, I would like to propose some suggestions. The first one is we need to focus on the vulnerable group in the Western and Central China with a low socioeconomic status, including the households who are suffering from laid off household and rural migrant workers and poor natural environment and backward areas. So to support the children with more welfare for the higher education, and then we should realize the social justice and share the benefits of social development, especially for the rural revitalization in the central and western part of China, to help the states regulate the secondary distribution of income and provide social welfare and increase investment in education in the western area, and promote the education equality among rural and urban cities, urban areas. And then we should allow the farmers to move freely and migrant from the rural and to the urban cities. And then we should make the talent cultivation, higher education fit the need of transformative industry and the labor market skills. In conclusion, there is a bright future for China's mass higher education based on the human capital theory, because in the current stage, it is still in the initial process of the mass higher education in China. But in the future, when the mass higher education size has reached to a certain extent, then the inequality of higher education will be reduced for long term. And this is the references. Thank you so much for your attention. And if you are also interested in Chinese and international higher education comparison, please contact me via this email and telephone. That's all. Thank you.